He thought he knew his wife, but the truth was far darker. What looked like betrayal was only the beginning. In a house that should have been safe, a secret waited, and Emily Harper's life was about to be destroyed. He thought his wife was cheating, but the truth was even worse. At 2:17 in the morning, Daniel Harper was wide awake, staring at the glow of a phone screen that wasn't supposed to exist. The house was silent. Outside, a cold wind brushed against the siding of the small suburban home, rattling a loose gutter just enough to sound like someone whispering in the dark. Inside, Daniel sat at the kitchen table in nothing but a gray t-shirt and sweatpants, his elbows resting beside a half-finished glass of whiskey. Across the table lay his wife's phone, locked, buzzing, again and again and again. The name on the screen didn't belong to anyone he recognized. Just 3 letters. J.M. A new message appeared, then another. Daniel didn't open them. He didn't have to, because he already believed he knew what they meant. For weeks, something had been wrong. His wife, Emily, had grown distant. Late nights at work, phone calls she would take in the garage, messages she would quickly swipe away the moment he walked into the room. At first, Daniel told himself he was imagining things. Marriage does that to people sometimes. Routine replaces passion. Silence replaces conversation. But suspicion is a slow poison. Once it enters your mind, it spreads. And now, sitting alone in the kitchen, staring at the flickering screen of a phone that wasn't his, Daniel Harper was convinced of one thing. His wife was cheating. What he didn't know was that the truth waiting on that phone was far more terrifying than betrayal, because 3 hours later, Emily Harper would be dead, and the man who loved her most would become the prime suspect in a crime that investigators say began long before anyone realized something was wrong. But that night, in that quiet kitchen, Daniel Harper believed he was uncovering an affair. He had no idea he was stepping into the first chapter of a nightmare that would unravel an entire life, and a secret buried so deeply in the past that even the police would struggle to understand it. Neighbors later told investigators they heard nothing unusual that night. No screams, no fighting, no crashing furniture, just the usual quiet rhythm of a suburban neighborhood asleep. The kind of silence that hides things. The kind of silence that keeps secrets. But digital evidence doesn't sleep, and sometime between midnight and dawn, something happened inside that house, something investigators would spend months trying to reconstruct. Because when police finally arrived at the Harper residence the next morning, the scene they walked into didn't look like the aftermath of a jealous husband catching his wife in an affair. It looked calculated, controlled, and disturbingly calm. The front door was unlocked. The living room lights were still on. Emily's purse sat neatly on the entry table, her car keys tucked inside as if she had just walked through the door minutes earlier. But Emily Harper wasn't there. She was upstairs, in the master bedroom, lying perfectly still. And the man who discovered her body was the same man who had spent the night wondering if she was being unfaithful. Daniel Harper. When detectives questioned him later that afternoon, they expected the usual story. A husband suspicious of his wife, an argument, maybe even a confession. But Daniel didn't confess. He told them something else instead, something that made the room go quiet. He said the phone messages weren't romantic. They weren't secret meetups. They weren't proof of an affair. They were warnings. Warnings that someone had been watching them, watching the house, watching Emily, for weeks. Detectives didn't believe him first, because people say strange things when they're desperate, especially when their spouse is dead. But when investigators pulled the phone records, they discovered something unsettling. The number texting Emily didn't belong to anyone in her contacts. In fact, it didn't belong to anyone at all. The number was unregistered, a ghost in the system. And the messages Daniel had seen that night were only the beginning. What police would eventually uncover inside that phone would force them to reconsider everything. The marriage, the night of the murder, and the assumption that Daniel Harper had simply been a jealous husband who snapped. Because buried within weeks of deleted conversations were messages that painted a very different picture. Messages that suggested Emily Harper had been afraid, terrified, actually, not of her husband, but of someone else.
Someone she believed had been following her. Someone she believed knew things about her past, things she had never told Daniel. And the deeper investigators looked, the stranger the story became. Because the messages weren't threats, they were instructions, carefully written, short, precise, almost like someone guiding her toward something or warning her about something coming. One message read, "Don't tell him yet." Another said, "You're running out of time." And the final message, sent just minutes before Daniel sat down at the kitchen table that night, contained only 4 words: "You should have listened." By the time detectives finished reading through the phone, one thing was clear. Daniel Harper had been wrong about the affair, but he was right about something else. Someone had been communicating with Emily in secret. Someone who clearly knew her well enough to frighten her. Someone who had been carefully staying invisible. And now, Emily Harper was dead, which left investigators with a question far more disturbing than simple jealousy. Who was J.M., and why had Emily Harper been so afraid of them? Because, as detectives would soon discover, the answer to that question didn't just explain Emily's death. It exposed a hidden story stretching back years. A story involving lies, disappearance, and a mistake someone had clearly been trying to bury forever. But the most chilling detail of all was something detectives noticed almost immediately. The final message Emily received had been opened but never answered, which meant someone had seen it. Someone inside that house at 2:17 in the morning. The same moment Daniel Harper sat in the kitchen watching the phone vibrate on the table. The same moment he believed his marriage was falling apart. The same moment he thought he had discovered betrayal. Instead, he had unknowingly stepped into the middle of a secret far darker than infidelity. A secret that would eventually drag detectives through a maze of half-truths, missing records, and a past Emily Harper had worked very hard to hide. And as investigators would soon learn, some secrets don't stay buried. They wait, quietly, patiently, until the moment they destroy everything. And on that cold night, inside that quiet suburban home, the destruction had already begun. Because by sunrise, one person was dead, another was under suspicion, and somewhere out there, the person sending those messages had disappeared, leaving behind nothing but a ghost number, 4 cryptic words, and a mystery that would soon capture the attention of an entire nation. But to understand what really happened inside the Harper house that night, you have to go back to the moment Daniel Harper first began to suspect something was wrong. Back to the small, almost invisible cracks forming inside a marriage that once looked perfectly normal. Back to the first lie, the first secret, and the first message from a name that didn't exist. J.M. Because the truth about Emily Harper was far stranger than anyone imagined, and by the time investigators finally uncovered it, the question wasn't just who killed her, it was why someone had been warning her for weeks that something terrible was coming. Emily Harper wasn't just anyone. She was the kind of woman that lit up a room without meaning to. Warm smile, easy laugh, the kind of presence that made strangers feel like old friends. Friends described her as careful, meticulous, almost obsessive about order, yet endlessly compassionate toward anyone in need. She worked as a project coordinator at a tech firm, a job that demanded precision, deadlines, and constant juggling, but she thrived under pressure, and she did it all with a grace that left even her colleagues in awe. Often Daniel said Emily had a quiet strength that made him feel invincible. Their marriage had started like a storybook romance. College sweethearts, first apartment, long walks in the park, Saturday morning coffees, dreams shared late into the night. But even the most picturesque marriages aren't immune to cracks. On the surface, Emily's life seemed ordinary, the life of a woman loved and secure. She ran errands, hosted occasional dinner parties, and kept a tidy home. But beneath that ordinary life, there were fissures that Daniel never fully understood. Fissures in her trust, her past, and even in the safety of her own home.
Friends and family described Emily as cautious to the point of paranoia. She rarely left her home unattended for long. She double-locked doors, monitored her emails obsessively, and was careful about who she allowed into her personal circle. In retrospect, those habits weren't quirks, they were warnings. Months before her death, Emily confided in a close friend that something, or someone, had been making her uneasy. She didn't go into detail, only that she felt watched and that it was getting harder to ignore. The friend recalled Emily checking her windows at night, stepping outside just to make sure the driveway was empty, her fingers trembling slightly as she locked the door behind her. Daniel, busy with his own career, dismissed these concerns at the time. After all, Emily had always been a worrier. He assumed she was imagining things. But Emily's unease was real, and by the time investigators pieced together the timeline, it became horrifyingly clear she had been right to fear. Emily's past was as ordinary as it was complicated. Born in a small Midwestern town, she grew up surrounded by quiet routines and a close-knit family. She had always been studious, ambitious, the kind of child who read ahead in textbooks and memorized facts that no one else cared about. In college, she met Daniel, and for a time, everything aligned perfectly. But even the most carefully constructed lives carry shadows. Emily had a few secrets, minor things she kept to herself. A former friendship turned sour, a brief professional conflict that left her wary of trust, and an inexplicable fear she never fully articulated. Investigators later discovered that these small hidden anxieties were linked, indirectly, to the events that would spiral into the night of her death. They weren't the cause, but they created the mental landscape in which terror could take root, quietly, until it became deadly. Even on the day she died, Emily's behavior seemed normal to anyone observing from the outside. She drove to work, she sent texts, she cooked dinner. She laughed at Daniel's joke during their evening meal, and yet a closer look revealed subtle signals that she was aware of a threat, carefully moving objects in the house, checking doors twice, texting someone in private, someone only identified by the initials JM. Daniel Harper would later recall small, almost imperceptible moments, the way Emily would hesitate before opening a door, her brief glances out the window when she thought no one was watching, the tiny pauses in conversation when she seems to be listening to something beyond the room. At the time, he didn't think much of it. Who does? Who suspects danger lurking in the familiar? But in hindsight, those tiny, easily overlooked actions were breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs that led investigators to understand that Emily Harper had been living in fear long before anyone realized the threat had escalated to violence. She was cautious by nature, meticulous by habit, and observant by instinct, and that instinct had told her something terrible was coming, only she didn't know how, when, or from whom. That fear, that quiet anxiety had left her open to the one thing she could never have predicted. The danger wasn't lurking in the shadows of strangers. It wasn't even in the streets outside their suburban neighborhood. The danger had been in her home all along. And by the time Daniel Harper realized she wasn't cheating, it was already too late. It started like any other day. The sun rose over the Harper household, spilling pale gold across the manicured lawn, across the quiet cul-de-sac, across the driveway where Daniel's car sat parked, tires still warm from the morning commute. Emily had left the house that day with her usual precision, lunch packed, briefcase in hand, keys tucked safely into her bag. Daniel waved her off, kissed her cheek, and went about his routine, oblivious that this day would shatter everything he thought he knew. At work, Emily was meticulous, moving through meetings, emails, and project deadlines with her usual efficiency. But beneath the professional exterior, a subtle tension lingered. An almost imperceptible tightness in her jaw, a fleeting glance over her shoulder, the occasional pause mid-task. Her colleagues noticed nothing, yet, in retrospect, those small, almost invisible cues were her instincts trying to warn her, trying to warn anyone who might pay attention. It was during her lunch break that the first signs of something wrong appeared. Emily stepped outside to check her phone. A message from J.M., cryptic as always, blinked on the screen. She frowned, her fingers hovering over the reply button, debating whether to answer. But she didn't. She couldn't. Not yet. Meanwhile, back at the Harper home, Daniel was dealing with his own distractions, a late report at work, a phone call from a colleague, the usual barrage of emails. He thought about Emily, about the text messages she had been receiving recently, but he pushed it aside. He had told himself repeatedly, "It's nothing, she's just stressed." Yet the messages weren't nothing. By late afternoon, Emily's unease had grown. She parked her car in the office lot, but her eyes never left her surroundings. She moved with caution, every step measured, every glance over her shoulder deliberate. And then she saw it. A car she didn't recognize parked several spaces away, engine off, windows tinted. She froze for a second, heart pounding. The vehicle didn't move as she walked past it, and when she looked again later, it was gone. She told no one. She didn't call the police. She trusted her instincts enough to know she had to handle this quietly, carefully, without alarming anyone, especially Daniel, because what she feared most was not judgment, not disbelief, but escalation. By evening, Emily was home. The Harper house, usually warm and welcoming, felt oppressive. The setting sun cast long shadows across the living room. Daniel returned from work, tired, distracted, still unaware that danger had already entered their lives. He greeted her with a hug, kissed her forehead, asked how her day went. She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. Dinner was quiet. The clock ticked relentlessly, each tick louder than the last, echoing through the house like a drumbeat. Emily's phone vibrated again, another message from J.M. She read it, tense, before slipping it into her pocket. She didn't speak of it, but Daniel noticed the subtle change, the way her fingers trembled slightly, the way her eyes darted toward the front door. He dismissed it, as husbands often do, attributing her anxiety to work stress or fatigue. He would later regret that dismissal. After dinner, Daniel went to check some work emails in the kitchen. Emily, insisting on finishing a few tasks herself, headed upstairs to the master bedroom. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional creak of floorboards. Minutes passed, then hours. Daniel, focused on his laptop, didn't notice the subtle shifts in the house, the slight click of the front door, barely audible, the faint sound of footsteps above, almost ghostly, stopping abruptly. By 2:17 a.m., Emily was dead. The moments leading up to that instant are still reconstructed in fragments, pieced together from phone logs, security footage, and forensic analysis. Investigators later determined that she had been lured into the bedroom, likely expecting no more than a confrontation or a warning from someone she thought was an acquaintance. But the encounter escalated violently, precise, calculated, controlled. Daniel Harper, asleep in his bedroom just down the hall, or so he thought, was unaware of the unfolding horror. When he discovered her body hours later, it was not in the chaos of a crime of passion. No overturned furniture, no desperate struggle. The scene was eerily calm. Nothing screamed panic. Nothing suggested random violence. Everything suggested planning.
And at the center of it all was the unanswered phone. The device that had warned Emily for weeks. The device that recorded her final moments. The device that pointed to a presence so deliberate, so invisible, that it eluded both husband and investigators until it was far too late.
For Daniel Harper, the day everything changed began like any other day, but ended in a nightmare that would unravel his entire life. Because the truth wasn't just about Emily's death, it was about what had been lurking behind the veneer of a suburban life. The kind of truth that doesn't announce itself, that creeps silently through hallways, into bedrooms, past locked doors, and leaves devastation in its wake. And when investigators pieced together the final texts, the missing time, and the silent witness of surveillance footage, one thing became terrifyingly clear. Emily Harper had been targeted, tracked, and silenced by someone who had been watching her far longer than anyone could have imagined. The day everything changed wasn't a single day, it was a countdown. And the final moment arrived at 2:17 a.m. inside a house that should have been safe. The first call to 911 came at 6:42 a.m. from a neighbor who noticed the Harper house unusually quiet. Emily's car was gone, something the neighbor knew wasn't typical for the early morning, but it wasn't the missing car that alarmed the most. It was the faint, almost imperceptible stillness. The kind that makes a neighborhood, usually alive with the hum of routine, feel like it's holding its breath. When officers arrived, the front door was unlocked, swinging slightly in the morning breeze. The lights in the living room were still on, flickering faintly from the early sun. Nothing seemed out of place at first glance, no forced entry, no sign of a struggle, but the officers immediately noticed the subtle details that suggested otherwise. A glass of water on the counter, half full, untouched overnight. The laptop still open on the kitchen table. A pair of reading glasses resting carefully atop a stack of bills. Everything was in place, too much in place. Daniel Harper appeared calm at first. He greeted the officers politely, explaining that Emily had left the house the night before to finish some work and never returned. But as questions were asked, the calm facade began to crack. Hands trembling slightly, voice rising and falling, eyes darting to the corners of the room. He admitted he had discovered messages from an unknown number on Emily's phone. Just a little confusing, but nothing alarming, or so I thought. Investigators took the phone immediately, noting its cracked screen, worn edges, and the notifications blinking across the home screen. What they saw inside the device, however, would change the case entirely. The messages from JM were fragmented, cryptic, and urgent. Instructions, warnings, short, deliberate statements that implied a threat. Don't tell him yet. You're running out of time. You should have listened. Each one was time-stamped, showing a consistent pattern of communication leading up to Emily's final hours. It was clear to detectives that Emily had been living in fear, silently, carefully hiding the extent of her anxiety from Daniel. But fear alone wasn't enough to account for the precise nature of the crime scene. Forensic analysis revealed evidence of premeditation, subtle traces of cleanup attempts, fingerprints meticulously wiped from surfaces, and a lack of defensive wounds. Whoever had killed Emily had done so efficiently, deliberately, and with knowledge of the house layout. Detectives focused on Daniel first. Statistically, the spouse is often the primary suspect. But there was no forced entry, no overt motive, at least none that Daniel admitted. He passed a polygraph, and interviews with colleagues and friends suggested he had no violent tendencies. Yet suspicion lingered. The proximity, the discovery of Emily's body, and the knowledge of her phone messages all painted him as the man most likely to know what happened. Meanwhile, investigators traced the phone number for JM only to find it did not exist. No registered owner, no account in any telecom system. It was a ghost, a digital phantom sending calculated warnings that no one could tie to a physical presence. Security footage from nearby businesses provided partial clarity but added more questions. A shadowy figure appeared on a camera several blocks from the Harper residence around 1:30 a.m., moving deliberately, avoiding streetlights, using alleyways. Clothing details were vague, gender uncertain, height approximate, a phantom in the night, just as the phone messages suggested. Detectives began constructing a timeline. Emily Harper had received messages starting in the late afternoon, which increased in frequency as evening turned to night. She returned home, did not leave the premises, and was killed sometime between 2 and 2:20 a.m. The exact cause of death, the entry point, and the manner of attack suggested intimate knowledge of her habits and the house's interior, information only someone close or meticulously observant could possess. Daniel Harper, meanwhile, cooperated fully. He provided phone passwords, work schedules, and his own movements for the night. He insisted he had no knowledge of the killer or their identity. And yet, even with his cooperation, the detectives faced a chilling realization. Emily Harper had been hunted. Not stalked, not randomly attacked, hunted.
The investigation intensified. Forensic teams scoured the home for clues, hair fibers, DNA traces, fingerprints. Analysts combed through Emily's phone, emails, and online activity. Detectives interviewed neighbors, co-workers, and family. Every lead brought them closer, but each lead also tangled the web tighter. Then, the breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Emily's journal. Hidden under a false bottom in her bedside drawer, it detailed her mounting fear over the previous weeks. She had written about someone watching her, someone sending cryptic messages, someone who knew intimate details about her past. The entries were meticulous, calm, almost like a notebook of survival. But the final page ended abruptly, mid-sentence. "I can't trust anyone, not even—" The page stopped there. It was clear she had been trying to piece together the threat herself, silently preparing for something she knew was coming. The journal, combined with the phone messages and the security footage, painted a harrowing picture. Emily Harper had known her life was in danger. She had attempted to navigate the threat alone, and she had failed. For the police, the case was no longer about a possible jealous spouse or a random intruder. It was about a meticulously planned attack, executed with precision, driven by knowledge, and perhaps fueled by something from Emily Harper's past, something someone wanted buried. And as detectives delved deeper, the question became clear. Who was J.M.? What did they want? And how had they orchestrated a crime so flawlessly that even those closest to Emily had no warning until it was too late? The answers, investigators would learn, would not only reveal the murderer, but expose a series of events, hidden connections, and buried secrets that stretched back years, touching lives far beyond the Harper household. As the investigation deepened, detectives realized the Harper case was no ordinary domestic homicide. The meticulous nature of the crime, combined with Emily's cryptic messages and the untraceable phone number, pointed towards something far more complex, something rooted not in jealousy, but in history. They began tracing Emily's past, her childhood, her teenage years, college, her early adult life. At first glance, everything appeared normal. A Midwestern upbringing, a loving family, good grades, no criminal record. But detectives knew better than to take surface appearances at face value. True crime, they understood, often hides behind the ordinary. Emily's journals became a focal point. They revealed layers of caution, of fear, and of relationships she had never disclosed to Daniel. Friends mentioned an ex-boyfriend from college, someone Emily had described as obsessive, though she insisted it was over years ago. The ex-boyfriend had a history of controlling behavior, threats, and unexplained disappearances from social circles, but nothing concrete that tied Emily to the present. Still, detectives noted the pattern. Someone from her past might have held a grudge, even after years. Emails, old phone records, and social media posts painted a picture of a woman who had tried to erase her tracks. Friends remembered Emily being unusually secretive about her movements, careful about leaving digital footprints, even deleting old contacts and emails. But some traces remained, enough to suggest she had once encountered danger she had survived but never fully revealed. Then came the financial records. Transactions, small and frequent, that didn't align with her apparent lifestyle. Detectives noticed payments to P.O. boxes, subscriptions to services that didn't make sense, and cryptic purchases, prepaid phones, cash deposits, and minor courier deliveries. Each item alone was insignificant. Together, they hinted at a life lived in shadows, a life Emily had hidden even from Daniel. It became clear that Emily Harper had been cautious for a reason. Someone knew more about her than she had ever allowed herself to share, and that someone had found her again. Interviewing her friends and family, detectives uncovered a pattern of unexplained visits, strange phone calls, and sudden relocations. Emily had confided in one close friend that a mysterious person seemed to anticipate her every move. "It's like they know what I'm thinking before I do," she had written. The phone number from JM, the messages, the precision of the crime, all now made sense in a horrifying way. Emily wasn't simply being stalked, she was being manipulated. Someone had studied her life, her habits, her fears, and used that knowledge to control her movements. The next breakthrough came from digital forensics. Investigators traced the ghost number's origin not to a conventional phone line, but to a series of burner devices registered overseas. Each device was active for just a few hours before being discarded, but patterns emerged. Messages were sent at consistent intervals, always from locations near the Harper household or along routes Emily would take. This wasn't random, this was orchestration. Detectives also discovered subtle clues hidden in Emily's personal belongings, notes tucked into books, seemingly innocuous reminders scribbled on calendars, and even encrypted files on her personal laptop. They weren't accidental, they were warnings, clues she had left for herself, or perhaps for someone she hoped would notice. By this point, Daniel Harper's role had largely been cleared in terms of direct involvement, but the emotional toll was immense. He began to understand that Emily had been living in fear, silently, and that the person responsible had been closer than anyone realized. The investigation then pivoted towards uncovering connections that stretched back years. People from Emily's past, college acquaintances, ex-boyfriends, colleagues from previous jobs were all scrutinized. Investigators uncovered a few individuals with motives, grudges, or obsession tendencies. One name in particular kept resurfacing in different contexts, linked to both cryptic digital activity and suspicious financial transactions. Yet even with a list of potential suspects, the most pressing question remained: why Emily? Why target a woman who, by all accounts, had lived a quiet, careful life? And why the precision, the patience, the seemingly endless preparation that culminated in her murder? As detectives dived deeper, one disturbing truth became clear. Emily Harper's past had never fully released her. The person who had orchestrated her death had known her intimately, had waited for the perfect opportunity, and executed their plan with cold calculation. And the clues left behind, messages, journals, financial trails, were not just evidence, they were breadcrumbs, designed to tell a story after the fact, perhaps even to taunt those left behind. By now, the investigation was no longer about a single crime scene, a single night. It was about untangling a web woven over years, a web of obsession, manipulation, and secrets that threatened to ensnare anyone who came close. The past was no longer past. It was alive, and it just claimed Emily Harper. As detectives continued their painstaking investigation into Emily Harper's past, one recurring thread emerged: someone from her present life who was closer than anyone had suspected. The name appeared in phone logs, whispered in interviews, and surfaced in the encrypted journal entries. A lover. Not a casual fling, not a fleeting connection, but a relationship that had been carefully hidden, layered beneath a facade of ordinary life. Someone Emily had trusted, someone who now became a person of interest. Daniel Harper, still reeling from grief, could hardly believe it. He knew of no affair, and yet the evidence suggested otherwise. The phone messages, the subtle hints in Emily's journal, the financial discrepancies, they all pointed towards an intimate connection she had concealed. But the question haunting everyone involved was why? The lover's identity, once uncovered, revealed not just betrayal, but a twisted web of manipulation. This person had been communicating with Emily long before the final messages from JM, weaving a complicated network of influence, guidance, and coercion. Some messages were warnings, some were instructions, and some were veiled threats.
Detectives realized,
horrifyingly, that this individual might have been an unwitting or deliberate link to the person who ultimately killed her. Every layer of the investigation pointed to a chain of deception. Emily had confided in this person, seeking protection, advice, even reassurance. And yet, the very confidant she had leaned on may have been part of the reason her life was put in jeopardy. Financial trails revealed transactions between Emily and the lover. Small, seemingly innocuous amounts at first. But when investigators dug deeper, the pattern suggested more than generosity or care. It suggested planning, coordination, and, in retrospect, complicity in hiding elements of her life from Daniel. And then there were the digital footprints. Email chains, encrypted chats, and deleted messages hinted at conversations not just about romance, but about threats, surveillance, and movements. The lover, whether knowingly or unknowingly, had been a conduit of information about Emily, her habits, her routines, her fears. The detectives pieced together a chilling timeline. For weeks, the lover had been the intermediary between Emily and J.M. The cryptic messages, the instructions, the warnings, they all funneled through this person. The question became, was the lover trying to help, or were they complicit? As interviews continued, some acquaintances described the lover as caring, protective, even anxious for Emily's safety. Others suggested manipulation, subtle pressure, and secrecy. The duality created a tension that investigators struggled to untangle. Trust and betrayal were intertwined so tightly it was nearly impossible to separate them. Forensic analysis added another layer. Traces of digital metadata showed that certain messages from J.M. had originated from devices or locations linked to the lover. Not conclusively, but enough to raise alarms. Investigators began to consider a terrifying possibility. Someone Emily had trusted completely might have facilitated the manipulation that led to her death. Daniel Harper, meanwhile, grappled with a mixture of grief, disbelief, and suspicion. Every revelation fractured the life he thought he knew. Every secret Emily had kept from him now carried a weight, and every new detail painted a picture of a woman who had been ensnared in a web far beyond the ordinary dangers of suburban life. The police widened the scope. They revisited Emily's past acquaintances, her college friends, her early career connections, anyone who might have known secrets she never shared. Each thread revealed more about the dangerous proximity of obsession and control that had shadowed her for years. And as the investigation unfolded, one fact became increasingly clear. Emily Harper's murder was not the result of a single moment of rage, not the work of a random intruder, and not even a simple act of jealousy. It was the culmination of relationships gone dark, of trust weaponized, and of secrets left unspoken. The lover's role, ambiguous, complex, and shadowed by fear, was a key piece in the puzzle. A puzzle that, when finally assembled, revealed a network of manipulation, fear, and hidden connections that nobody outside that house could have imagined. The house that seemed safe, the sanctuary Emily had returned to that night, was in fact a trap constructed with intimate knowledge of her routines, her fears, and her allies. Every message, every warning, every movement had been observed. Every misstep had been anticipated. And in the center of it all was someone Emily had trusted completely. Someone who knowingly or unknowingly had set the stage for the tragedy that unfolded at 2:17 a.m. The deeper detectives dug, the clearer it became that Emily Harper's death was not an isolated incident. Every lead, every piece of evidence, every whisper from the past began converging, forming a pattern so chilling it left investigators questioning how a life so ordinary could be ensnared in such a meticulously constructed nightmare. It was the combination of digital footprints and behavioral patterns that finally began pointing to a suspect. The phone messages from J.M., once assumed to be anonymous warnings, carried subtle identifiers, phrases, timing, and language usage that matched communications tied to someone Emily had encountered years ago. a person who had once been close yet had vanished from her life, only to return with precision, patience, and lethal intent. Investigators reviewed hundreds of hours of surveillance footage, meticulously cross-referencing locations, times, and behaviors. The shadowy figure from the night of the murder was not random. Every movement, every pause, every seemingly insignificant action aligned with a timeline that only someone intimately familiar with Emily's routines could orchestrate. Then came the breakthrough in financial forensics. Small, deliberate transactions, traced back to burner accounts, seemingly unconnected, formed a pattern when plotted against Emily's calendar and travel history. The pattern indicated surveillance, preparation, and strategic planning over months, even years. The killer had studied her life with obsessive precision, anticipating her actions down to the minute. The lover's role, ambiguous, complex, and shadowed by fear, became critical in this phase of the investigation. While the lover may not have physically committed the act, investigators uncovered evidence that their communications had inadvertently, or perhaps knowingly, provided insight to the killer. Text messages, phone calls, and even casual mentions of Emily's plans had been intercepted and analyzed by a killer. Messages, emails, and late-night conversations revealed discussions that tracked Emily's location, her plans, and her vulnerabilities. It wasn't just a betrayal of trust, it was a key that unlocked the killer's ability to act without interruption. By now, detectives had compiled a comprehensive profile, someone familiar with Emily's past, someone able to manipulate digital and physical traces, someone who could enter her life invisibly, yet leave calculated breadcrumbs to maintain control even from afar. Investigators returned to the Harper home, this time with a forensic lens on items previously overlooked. Subtle wear marks on floorboards suggesting a pattern of movement, slight scratches on windowsills indicating repeated observation, faint fingerprints on surfaces previously thought wiped clean. The house itself, once a sanctuary, was now a record of premeditation, every corner containing the shadow of the killer. It was during the review of digital metadata that the final piece fell into place. The messages sent from JM could be traced not to a single device, but to multiple points of convergence. Burner phones, public Wi-Fi access points, VPN routing, all converging toward one person, someone Emily had trusted, someone she had considered a friend, someone she had perhaps underestimated. The tension among the investigative team was palpable. Each revelation carried weight, each discovery deepened the horror. Forensic and behavioral evidence, once disparate, now painted a coherent, terrifying picture. Emily Harper had been hunted, manipulated, and ultimately killed by someone who knew her intimately and who had orchestrated the perfect crime from start to finish. Interviews with acquaintances of the suspect revealed a dual personality, outwardly normal, socially unremarkable, yet capable of manipulation, coercion, and cold calculation. Their personal and professional life offered no hints, nothing that would prepare anyone to suspect them. But beneath that surface lay a predator who had targeted Emily with precision and patience. The investigators realized the killer had also been meticulous in erasing traces, burner phones discarded, surveillance carefully avoided, physical evidence minimized. Yet the human element, the patterns of language, the psychological footprints left behind, provided a trail that could not be wiped away. Every piece of the puzzle now pointed to a single conclusion. Emily's death was not random. It was intentional, strategic, calculated, and it was the culmination of years of obsession, careful observation, and deliberate manipulation. Daniel Harper, once at the center of suspicion, began to understand the full horror. The betrayal, the secrets, the hidden connections, they weren't from him. They were from someone who had infiltrated their lives with precision, patience, and lethal intent.
The web was tightening. Every clue, every message, every digital imprint, every shadow of the past was leading to the unmasking of a killer whose calm exterior masked a mind capable of extraordinary calculation. And when that final confrontation with truth arrived, it would shatter everything Daniel, Emily's friends, and even the investigators had ever believed about the safety of home, the limits of trust, and the darkness that could dwell in human obsession. Because the nightmare that had begun as whispers in the shadows, as cryptic messages, and as hidden fear, was finally approaching its revelation. And when the killer was revealed, it would become chillingly clear. This was not just a crime of passion or of opportunity. It was a crime meticulously orchestrated over years, a testament to the darkest corners of obsession, manipulation, and vengeance. Emily Harper had been silenced, but the story of how, why, and by whom was about to come fully into light. The investigation had stretched over months, threading through shadows of Emily Harper's past, digital breadcrumbs, cryptic messages, and subtle betrayals. And yet, even after painstaking analysis of phone records, financial trails, and forensic evidence, the final revelation came not with fanfare, but with a quiet, devastating clarity. It was a combination of forensic minutiae and human observation that finally unmasked the killer. A subtle pattern, missed in the early days of the investigation, now became impossible to ignore. The language used in JM's messages, the timing of the texts, and the precise knowledge of Emily's routines all pointed to someone close. Not an ex-boyfriend, not a distant acquaintance, but someone intimately entwined with her life in ways that had been hidden in plain sight. The killer was not only a master of manipulation, they were patient, strategic, and methodical. Over the course of months, they had monitored Emily's movements, probed her relationships, and quietly shaped events to isolate her, ensuring she could not seek help. Every message from JM, every cryptic warning, every calculated step in the crime's execution bore the signature of someone who had studied her life in microscopic detail. When the detectives finally confronted the suspect, the weight of the evidence was overwhelming. DNA traces, device metadata, surveillance corroboration, and financial links left no room for denial. The individual, someone Emily had once trusted, whose presence in her life had seemed benign, was arrested. Their calm demeanor, once a shield, could no longer hide the truth. Interrogation revealed motive layered with obsession, envy, and a cold desire for control. Emily's quiet vigilance had irritated the killer. Her independence threatened their sense of dominance.
They had used manipulation, subtlety, and deception to engineer a scenario in which Emily was cornered, vulnerable, and ultimately at their mercy. Daniel Harper, who had suffered the unbearable weight of grief and suspicion, finally learned the full truth. His wife had not been unfaithful. She had been vigilant, cautious, aware of a danger that even he had been blind to. The betrayal was not hers. It was the killer's, hidden beneath a veneer of trust. The community, stunned by the revelation, struggled to reconcile the ordinary facade of the perpetrator with the extraordinary nature of the crime. How could someone so seemingly normal orchestrate such a calculated, intimate act of violence? The answer, investigators noted, lay in patience, obsession, and meticulous planning. Emily Harper's story, once a private tale of fear and vigilance, became a case study in human psychology, the dangers of hidden obsession, and the devastating consequences of underestimating those who dwell quietly in the margins of life. In the aftermath, Daniel committed himself to preserving Emily's memory, while investigators worked tirelessly to ensure the case served as a warning. The most dangerous threats often come not from strangers lurking in the night, but from those who infiltrate life quietly, who manipulate from within, and who exploit trust with lethal precision.
Emily's life, though tragically cut short, was remembered for its courage, its care, and the quiet strength with which she faced her unseen predator. And the investigation, painstaking in its detail and relentless in pursuit of justice, ultimately illuminated the dark truths that had shadowed her final days. In the end, the nightmare that began in whispers, cryptic messages, and hidden fear concluded not with confusion, but with clarity. The killer was unmasked. Justice, painstakingly assembled from digital traces, forensic evidence, and human insight, was finally achieved. Yet the story of Emily Harper serves as a haunting reminder. Danger can dwell in the familiar, and the shadows that seem distant may in fact be far closer than we ever realize. Emily Harper's story is a chilling reminder that the people we trust most can sometimes hide the darkest secrets. Her life, cut tragically short, exposes a world of obsession, manipulation, and deceit that lurks beneath the surface of ordinary life. But thanks to relentless investigation and careful analysis, the truth was finally brought to light. If you want to uncover more stories like this, cases of mystery, deception, and justice, subscribe to our Murder Book 360 channel and turn on notifications. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves true crime, and join us as we continue to explore the darkest corners of human nature.